Greetings, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything. We're up to episode 108 of this show, which is pretty crazy, and for the first time this past week, we allowed the show to go up on YouTube, albeit in the audio-only form in a podcast feed on YouTube Music. However, after that happened this week, I think I've reconsidered, and this show, we're going to start putting it up on our YouTube channel on a 4-day delay. But still, we're going to put it up there in its video form, which we haven't done before. So hopefully you guys enjoy that on our YouTube channel going forward. I just want to thank everybody who is pledging at that Ask Shane tier or higher at patreon.com/sifted for $7 a month. You guys are making this show happen. Obviously, we appreciate all of our patrons. But those of you who are going above and beyond to make sure this show happens really is appreciated. Also, we should mention that those of you who are pledging at that higher tier, you have a higher chance of getting your questions into the show. However, right now, we are hurting for questions. So head to sifted.net. At the header, there's a link to go to our forums where you can ask me questions about literally anything. There's no reason you could say, I can't think of something to ask. I will answer questions about anything. And again, we appreciate it if you'll do that. Again, without you guys, this show simply doesn't happen. However, we do have plenty of good questions for this week. Let's get right to them. All right, our first question comes from a consistent Ask Shane Anything supporter, Cinetike. After your recent ordeal building your new PC, I need to ask how you feel about PC versus consoles. Personally, I've been a PC main all my life because my mom hated consoles growing up and my dad needed PCs for work. Still, I'm not a PC master race guy. This gen of consoles is the best it's ever been. You get lots of 60 frames per second modes at a decent price. Okay, something else I should mention here is that Cinetike was integral in helping me upgrade my PC / build my new PC. He helped me pick the parts for my new PC. He looked at my budget and was like, hey, this is probably where you can get the most for your money. And then once I got the parts, he helped me put it together. Basically, he helped me with BIOS and a bunch of other stuff. Here's the thing about building a PC. It hasn't changed hardly at all. I went back and kind of looked at like some of my correspondence when I built my PC like 10 years ago for Sifted, and a lot of the questions I had back then, I had this time as well. I guess what I would say is like, it's no more user-friendly than it was before. Everything's pretty much the same as it was 10 years ago. It's not worse either. I mean, unless you want to get into like water cooling, but I will say this, that stuff does seem to be easier than it was before. I'm not doing that with this. I just have fans in my PC. I don't really need water cooling. And I'll be honest with you, most of you probably don't need it either. There's a little bit of like a cottage industry that is like soaking the PC master race for all its money. So anyway, the build is basically done. However, I've noticed some quirks and other issues with my new PC. And again, a lot of it is just growing pains. However, I do feel like the jump from Windows 10 to Windows 11 has created a little bit of like a line, a divider. A lot of programs that I've had since like the early 2000s worked flawlessly on Windows 10, and now Windows 11 I'm starting to see some hiccups with them, like for example like Microsoft Word. I have Microsoft Word from like 2003 or whatever. It's worked on every PC I've ever had, and I just need it to write. I don't need it to do anything else, so it's good enough for me. The 2003 version is fine. But in Windows 11, it has all these weird hiccups, like you load it up, and if you go back to the program, it'll pause, it'll say like not responsive or what. That never happened on Windows 10. And then there's the usual stuff that comes along with building a new PC and like basically wiping your hard drive, because what I tried to do was use the same Windows 10 hard drive I had in my old rig and just put it in this new one. That presented a ton of issues, and if you want to know more about that, you can just watch the latest Game Face where I detail that more. But more of the issues were like, you couldn't use like a lot of hardware. Like one thing is that this motherboard doesn't have as many SATA connections. It doesn't have as many PCI slots. So like I had a video capture card that was in my old PC that I can't use. I had to disconnect my Blu-ray drive in this PC because what they're trying to do now is pushing you towards using NVMe drives. I think I got that right. Which are just these like little stick drives that you bolt directly onto the motherboard instead of using mechanical hard drives. However, I need huge hard drives for like archiving all our shows and like storing all the B-roll footage of the games I capture. So I have several huge mechanical hard drives that I still need to use. So I had to sacrifice some things. And this was a won't say top of the line, but it was a gaming motherboard. And that's just kind of the way things are going. They want you to buy these little skinny like NVMe drives and put those directly into your motherboard instead of just having all these mechanical drives. And I understand it is the future, but begrudgingly, I can't afford to buy like 10 terabyte NVMe drives. So I had to make some sacrifices for this build. It feels like I'm learning a little bit about how PC gaming is moving into the next generation, but I still have one foot in the last generation with the old drives. So that's been a little bit of a problem. But mostly it's just been the programs. It feels like a lot of programs just don't work as well on Windows 11 as they did on Windows 10. I'm not sure why that's the case. Now let's talk about PC versus consoles, as you say. So I had this thing built for like a week, and I didn't even play any games on it. I was just trying to get it up and running so I could edit video and get ready for Game Face and things like that. Now it's been like a week and a half. I've had time to actually use all my programs, try to edit stuff, and figure out where video files aren't working anymore. I've had to go back and download a bunch of codecs, drivers. I mean, everybody does this when you build a new PC. It's like a 2-week bumpy road where you're like, oh yeah, I forgot I need that codec, or I forgot I need that very specific driver, or I forgot I need this program or whatever. So there's been a lot of that. But finally, over the last like 5 days, I've been able to just use the PC to try and play games. I have an RTX 4070. I have 32 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM. My CPU is an i5 14500. Obviously, my motherboard is built for DDR5 RAM. So my rig should be pretty good. Like, it's not top of the line. It's not like Matt's PC where it's just like this $5,000 thing that's just like completely out of control. My PC, I think, is probably the PC that the average PC gamer would build, not someone who's part of the master race trying to get every last frame rate out of it. And I'm just going to say, I'm kind of disappointed in it. I know if you watch Digital Foundry's videos, they'll say like the equivalent to PS5 and Xbox Series X is like this ancient old GTX graphics card. No, I don't know what they're talking. I know they're supposed to be the experts, but I'm just saying with my own two eyes, setting things up, looking at games running on my PS5 or my Xbox Series, and then looking at them running on my PC, like, to me, this RTX 4070 is kind of on par with the PS5 and Xbox Series X. This graphics card, by the way, was like $550. So the graphics card alone was the same price as one of those consoles, and then you need the RAM to run it. I spent like $1,100 overall on my PC build. So I spent $1,100. I think, am getting the same performance as I'm getting out of my PS5 and Xbox Series. Both those consoles and this PC, you put them in for, if you run a game in 4K, you put on ray tracing, the best you're going to get is 30 frames per second. And that's exactly what's happening with my PC. That's exactly what happens generally on PS5 and Xbox Series X. You get 4K with ray tracing for 30 frames per second. That's what I'm getting with this PC. So I think overall I'm disappointed in that part of it, the actual gaming part of it. And the other thing too is like, you know, you build your new rig, you're like, oh man, what games could I play that I couldn't play before, and they're going to look different, and I can't find one. I've been playing like Diablo 4. I played Doom Eternal. I'm not going to go spend $60 just to buy Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and then compare that to my PS5. I'm not doing that. Like, the other thing I would say too is it feels like there aren't as many PC-only games that will like really push your hardware, like where, you know, beyond what you're getting on consoles. In all honesty, like a lot of the best looking games on PC were console games first that have been ported to PC. So I've been kind of disappointed in the gaming side of it. I mean, I guess the good news is I've kind of weaned myself off of PC gaming over the last half decade because my rig was so underpowered. Like, the only time I ever played games on it anymore was when I had to. Like, if a publisher sent me review code and they're like, all we have left is PC, then I'd take a PC code. Or if a game was only PC, which doesn't happen that often other than with indie games, then I would play them on my PC. But otherwise, I haven't really used it for a while. And now I have this new rig I spent all this money on, and I'm just like, I don't really feel like I need to play games on it. I'd rather sit on the couch, man. I just would. Now, as far as like the work side of it, which is really why I built this, it's nice to have a decent gaming PC, obviously. I work in the industry, I should have one. But really it's for work, for rendering video, for editing video, all that kind of stuff. All the media-related activities I use my PC for, which is what I use my PC for like 95% of the time. That stuff is mostly better. Like I said earlier, like a lot of programs like choke on Windows 11, like, and then there's other weird quirks about Windows 11, like the way that they handle Windows Explorer, like just going to a folder and looking at the files in that folder. And look, to be fair, I have gigantic folders because I have a folder that collects like all the thumbnails and screenshots that I need to use for Sifted, and I have a folder that's all B-roll. That's just like clips and trailers and stuff like that I'll use to edit videos like this one. And they're huge. Like the images one has, I don't know, like 4,000 images in it or whatever. Windows 10 could sort that no problem. If I would sort it by date, it would take maybe 3 seconds, and that folder is sorted by date. I can do that in Windows 11, and it just sits there forever. I've done it. Went and had dinner and come back, it still hadn't sorted it by date. So to me, there are a lot of drawbacks of Windows 11. Again, that's kind of typical. But as far as like using this PC for work and things like that, the CPU is the most important thing. And again, I have an i5-14500, and that thing does seem to make a huge difference for me in a lot of ways, as far as rendering video, how quickly the editing program works, like Adobe Premiere, how, being able to scrub through footage, like all that stuff makes a difference. The DDR5 RAM doesn't hurt either. So I've found that this PC has been a boon for productivity and working on stuff for the site. But as far as playing games on it, I've been kind of disappointed. So maybe it should be that I should be more impressed with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, what I'm getting out of those for the amount of money that I spent. I don't know. But overall, like, you can definitely not sign me up for the PC master race. Okay, our next question comes from someone who also asks a lot of questions for this show, and that is Bachby. If Metal Gear Solid 3 Delta Snake Eater is the success Konami hopes it to be, do you think it will do the same thing with the other Metal Gear games and fill in the gaps of the series with a completed set of modernized games? Will Konami do it chronologically? Is Konami practicing with Snake Eater before tackling the first 2 games? Will it attempt to expand the story, build new areas, alter the combat, or otherwise make significant changes? Well, Bachby, the timing for your question is pretty good, because just today, Konami released a developer doc where the people who are working on Delta Snake Eater talk about just various things. And the overarching theme from that was that they miss Kojima. The head developer on Delta Snake Eater was like, I would give anything to have Kojima back here and be working with the original Metal Gear team. That is never happening, because Kojima has started his own studio and is making way more money than he ever made at Konami, and he took, I would argue, many of the best developers from the Metal Gear team with him to Kojima Productions. So, unfortunately for Konami, that is not happening. Now, let's think about what Konami's doing here. There is a reason it chose to do a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3 first. And I think that's the sweet spot for Konami, because I don't think most people consider it the most important. Some do consider it the best, but I don't think most people consider it the most important, but people still really like it. So there's built-in interest there. However, if you kind of fall on your face, people, I don't believe anyway, are going to be as angry as if they were if you did a remake of the first Metal Gear Solid and completely botched that project. So, do I think this is practice for the more high-profile Metal Gear Solid remakes? Yeah, maybe a little. I still think that they know that fans love Metal Gear Solid 3, and they don't want to mess it up. But I think they also realize that it's not as bad as if they messed up the first Metal Gear, remaking that, because I firmly believe that if they do a good job remaking the first Metal Gear, I think that game will be the best-selling game of whatever year it's released. That's how much people revere the very first Metal Gear Solid. It's like Matt likes to say on Game Face, it's like whatever you really loved at 12 is the thing that you're going to love for the rest of your life. And a lot of us were like 12 or whatever when Metal Gear Solid came out. And I think a lot of people have an affinity for that. So I do think there's a little bit of them figuring out, okay, 3 is a perfect middle ground for the first one before we tackle the big boys, Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 2. Now, the one that I think will come last, so you're asking will they come chronologically? I do not believe it. I mean, obviously they're starting with 3, so that can happen, but I don't think they're going to go to 1, 2, and then 4. I think 4, no matter what, is going to be the last one, because that game was a PlayStation 3 game, and any PlayStation 3 game is notoriously difficult to remake, port, or do whatever. The architecture of PS3, very specific, very hard to work with, very hard to port to other platforms. So I think that'll be last. Maybe after Metal Gear Solid 5, but Metal Gear Solid 5 doesn't need to be remade for another 5 years or so, but I think it's going to take them at least 5 years to get through the first Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2. So it could be that Metal Gear Solid 5 is remade before Metal Gear Solid 4. So I think that's what Konami is doing right now. I think it realizes that it has a cash cow. It's been watching what Capcom has been doing with the old Resident Evil games. I mean, Capcom's just printing money, remaking its old games. And I think Konami wants to get in on that, but I think it's also very nervous about touching anything that Kojima worked on, and so I think it's being very careful, which is a good thing, because remember, they just released that collection of the old versions of these games, and people were kind of pissed off about how they handled that. So Konami needs to mind its P's and Q's while remaking these games, and so far it seems like it is. Okay, our last question for Ask Shane Anything episode 108 comes from Zet Saber. Comparing pre-COVID to now, how has your neighborhood changed? Interesting. I don't know where you live, but I live in West Los Angeles. I live about 3 miles off of the shore or away from the beach, and then right in the middle between Santa Monica and Venice. So to Santa Monica, it's 3.5 miles. To Venice Beach, it's 3.5 miles. So that's just kind of where I'm living. And I would just say this, in West Los Angeles, it's kind of hard to tell that COVID ever happened at this point. If you go into businesses, like all the little dots on the floor that were put there so that we could all social distance, they're all gone. Any mention of social distancing on the restaurant's doors are gone. Any mentions of masks or anything like that used to be on the doors, those are all taken down now at this point. Like, honestly, it feels like there was never a pandemic. And a big part of that, obviously, is that most of us aren't getting COVID anymore. I mean, there's a spike going right now, but when I say spike, it's like, 5,000 people in America have it or something like that. Now, I don't mean to say that's not a big deal for the people who do have it. I do think COVID is probably still dangerous for older folks with pre-existing conditions. But the strains are very weak now, or at least weaker than they were when COVID first started. So you don't see a lot of younger people dying from it like you did in the first couple waves of COVID. And I just think a lot of people have just kind of moved on. I think the reason we were able to do that is because of the test kits, at least in America. So they started sending out free test kits to anybody who wanted them. Like right now, we have 30 or 40 test kits underneath our cabinet. So I think most people are at the point now where they're like, okay, I have test kits that I got for free. And if I feel a little scratch in my throat, why not test? Everyone's used to doing it now. It takes like 5 minutes. And I think when people test, and if they test positive, they're staying home. And I think that's in conjunction with the vaccines, which made it harder to pass it on to other people, in conjunction with people testing and being responsible and all pulling the rope in the same direction. I think that's what ultimately kind of conquered the pandemic. Now, I mean, again, it's still going on. COVID's never going away. It's going to be a part of our lives for forever, which really sucks. Because the last time I got it, it was pretty brutal compared to the first time I got it. And hopefully we don't get another strain here where it goes back to the power of the Delta, where people in their 30s and 40s are dying again. So I think people, it was a horrible chapter in our lives and our history. And I think when we finally turn the corner, I think it's just something that people want to forget about. And I think that's reflected in your local area. And I don't know where you live or anyone else who's watching this where you guys live, but as far as here is concerned, like everything's pretty much gone back to normal. You don't have the weird people flipping out in grocery stores or at Target anymore. You don't see empty shelves anymore. You don't see people fighting over toilet paper anymore. All those nightmares that existed for like 2 or 3 years are all gone. And I think most people just want to put it in the rearview mirror for good. So yeah, I mean, pre-COVID and now in West Los Angeles, it's kind of the same. It's kind of gone back to the way it was. Thank God. Okay, that's it for Ask Shane Anything episode 108. I actually had to record this episode twice because, again, problems with my PC, that things aren't set up the same. So I recorded an entire episode and the audio was way too high and blown out, and I had to re-record this whole dang thing again. So anyway, again, thanks to everybody who's pledging at that Ask Shane Anything tier at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/sifted. That's SIFTD. Once again, I'm going to start allowing this show to run 4 days delayed on our YouTube channel in video form. It's already been going up as a podcast at YouTube Music for the last couple weeks. But we're going to make that change and start allowing you guys to watch the video version. So I hope you guys appreciate it. Give the show a like, obviously. Comment if you want to. Again, this is a free-form show. If you're not a patron, you're not going to be able to ask questions for this show. I'm sorry, that's where we draw the line. And in fact, people who pledge at that $7 or more tier, the Ask Shane tier, are more likely to get their questions in the show. I think that's only fair. I think everyone understands that. But I appreciate everyone's support. Even if you're just watching this and you're giving it a like, or you're subscribing, or you're commenting, or whatever, I love engagement as well. Everything matters, everything helps, and we appreciate it very much. So have yourself an awesome Friday, an awesome weekend, and we'll see you for Game Face on Tuesday.